It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and please be sure to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, it's Herd Mentality. You know the drill. You submit the questions, the comments, whatever you have, and I provide the answers or the insight that I have on that particular topic. We're going to start with a bunch of questions that are addressing the Buffalo Bills linebacker position. And obviously I talked about them pretty heavily last week, whether it was Terrell Bernard and Tyrel Dodson, the draft options, and I think that provoked a lot of different comments and questions. So let's start with those and work our way through an outstanding slate of items to get through. First one comes through Chris, who says, with Terrell Bernard projected as a Milano-esque type linebacker, and hypothetically he performs as a young Milano, can the Bills defense function properly with Milanos out there? It's a fair question. I think the biggest concern that I have about a pair of Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano is that it's a very small pair of linebackers, probably the smallest pair of linebackers in the league. And then you're talking about a very small defensive tackle in Ed Oliver. So one defensive tackle in the 280s and two linebackers in the 220s. That's small. That's inviting teams to run the football right at you. And if you do wind up going down this path, which I think it's a possibility that the Bills do this, the emphasis has to go right back to the defensive line. If you want to give Milano and Bernard a chance on the second level, you got to make sure that they can play free. You have to make sure that they are facing minimal amounts of contact. You want to keep them clean. And so I think this puts an even greater emphasis on adding to your defensive tackle rotation and your defensive end rotation. So you want to roll out there with those two guys, and maybe you really like the speed dynamics that those guys give you and how you can really enjoy their range. All right, you better keep them covered up, because that's two players that are undersized, and their ability to take on and really play through contact and play into the line of scrimmage is going to be really challenging. And so if that's the plan, you better beef up that D line in both spots, D tackle and D end. Stu gave me this question, and really a bunch of other people gave me this question as well. This is probably the number one thing that I've been asked over the last few days. And Stu says, after listening to your draft linebacker preview, it's clear to me that the Bills have a Tremaine Edmunds sized hole in the middle of the D, and that Jack Campbell is the only guy in this class who can fill it when you combine skill set, size, and football IQ. So it's clear to us that Campbell is the clear choice and has to be obvious to every GM in the league. So who are the other Mike linebacker needy teams we need to be on the lookout for trading in front of the Bills to grab him, or are we the only team that would pick him in round one? It's a fair question. I'll say this. I looked at Jack Campbell through the lens of the Buffalo Bills, and I think he'd be a good Mike linebacker for honestly any team, but I think other teams may be more interested in other types of linebackers for their team. There's probably some teams out there that would prefer Drew Sanders than Jack Campbell, and I would understand that. So I think that's something to be mindful of right off the bat. But I did a little inventory here of the teams out there that I think have a need at linebacker, and it's particularly Mike linebacker, where they could use an upgrade, and Jack Campbell would make sense for them. So let me give you this list of teams, and it's a pretty long list. I have the Browns, the Steelers, the Texans, the Titans, the Raiders, Giants, Eagles, Vikings, and Cardinals. I think all of those teams, in addition to the Bills, have a big time upgrade opportunity for the Mike linebacker position. Now, here's what I'll say about all those other teams. They've also got a lot of other needs, a lot, where you look at the Bills and say, yeah, there's places that you can upgrade, but I mean, their most glaring hole is clearly at middle linebacker. And so I think when you really narrow this down to who's going to pick a linebacker in the first round, I think the Bills are the most likely team out of those that I mentioned. Maybe the Giants. Now, that's the team that gives me a level of concern, but I think the Giants are the type of team that might prefer Drew Sanders in more of an attack style front, right? The Wink Martindale defense, they like to really blitz and be aggressive with their front. Well, that's going to play more to the strengths of a Drew Sanders than a Jack Campbell, in my opinion. So that's something that I think about when I consider the Giants as a team that's picking right in front of the Bills, and the hope, at least, that the Bills pick Jack Campbell in the first round. The next one comes from Gene, who says, can you explain what is asked of the weak side linebacker and middle linebacker in the Bills' defensive scheme and why Matt Milano cannot fill the Mike linebacker role? This is what this boils down to. It's not that I don't think Matt Milano can slide over and play in the middle. And I think the big contrast in Mike linebacker versus weak side linebacker for the Bills defense is a little bit more downhill, having to play into the line of scrimmage. Your coverage drops are a little bit different, where the Bills like to use Matt Milano as a matchup player, and he will play all the way to the overhang and situational man stuff, and use him creatively for how they want to space the field to take away certain things. And so Matt Milano's skill set is really tailored for that type of role. And here's the most important part of this conversation about, well, can't Matt Milano just play Mike linebacker? Matt Milano's awesome as a weak side linebacker, like one of the best in the game. You don't want to mess with that. Matt Milano is an established player in that role, and he's awesome at it. Why you want to mess with that? And potentially make Matt have a less version of Matt Milano in a different position, and then you try to make the Matt Milano thing happen with Terrell Bernard or whatever player. I think that's what it really comes down to. We want Matt Milano to be the best version of himself, and him being the best version of himself means playing weak side linebacker in this defense. J.O. says, a lot of mocks are having the Bills trade back to take Jack Campbell for better value. You have mentioned it may not be worth the risk of losing out on him. There's another aspect to think about. What about the loss of the fifth-year option? The Bills had Tremaine on a cost-controlled deal for 5 years. If Jack hits, it could be we'd lose another middle linebacker to free agency. Having the fifth year alone may be worth the pick at 27, just a thought. I think that's a good way to look at it. And so not only are you risking moving away from your guy, but you do forfeit that fifth-year option, because the fifth-year option is only applicable to players selected in the first round. So you lose out on that year of control. Now, here's what I would say is if Jack Campbell hits, we're talking about the Bills cap situation 5 years from now, which is probably going to look a lot different than it is today. But I think you're always thinking about value, right? The name of the game in the NFL is value. Everyone has the same amount of money to spend. It's about how you invest it better than other teams. And so you're always thinking about value. That's huge. But for Jack Campbell and the idea that the Bills were to trade back and still get him not in the first round, you still have a lot of ways to control the player. And that, you could franchise tag him, which is not all that much different than what his cost for the fifth-year option would be. So it's there's some things to consider there. But it's really, if he's your guy, if that's the guy that you think is going to wear the green dot for your defense, right? You think that's your starter at middle linebacker and it's your biggest need. I don't know how you don't pick him, right? I don't think you can mess around and risk not getting your guy. Now, if you pull it off, that's great. But you have to be comfortable with that value proposition. If you move back to 35 or 40 or whatever, you have to live with the idea that, hey, you might not get your guy in Jack Campbell. So there's a lot to consider for Mr. Brandon Beane when he's on the clock. All right, folks, we got a bunch more to get to here in just a moment. But first, I need to tell you about Built Bar. And in fact, the Built March Madness bracket, it's still going on. We all know that you have a favorite bar or puff, and now is the time to make it count. Head on over to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. I'm voting for the Brownie Batter Puffs, so head on over and make sure that you vote for your favorite bar or puff. And when you do, when you place your vote, 50 lucky Locked On listeners, they're going to win a free box of Built Bars. And not only that, but somebody out there is going to win a 12-month subscription to Built Bars to have them delivered monthly straight to your door. And folks, if you haven't tried Built Bar, not sure what you're waiting for. These are the best tasting protein bars ever. They're amazing. They're delicious. So many great flavors, covered in 100% real chocolate, and they're healthy, right? They're low calories. They're low sugar. They're high in protein. They're awesome. So check them out. Head on over to Built March Madness right now to vote. Pick up a box while you're there. And look, time's running out here, so hop in and support your pick. The next one comes from John, who says, I had a question when evaluating a wide receiver's route tree coming into the NFL. On a scouting report, does limited route tree mean the player is unable to run certain routes, or does it mean he wasn't given the opportunity to run certain routes in college? Can it be a bit of both? And how do scouts project whether a player can improve their route tree on the next level? For example, if you're Brandon Beane looking to draft a similarly sized wide receiver at 27, would you rather draft a slightly above average athletic wide receiver who can run a complete route tree, or a freakish athletic wide receiver who ran a limited route tree in college, aka DK Metcalf? Well, John, I'll say this. Any draft analyst that is writing thorough scouting reports should elaborate on what they mean about a limited route tree. Did they run a limited route tree in college? And so there's a projection, right? They're going to have to learn to run more routes and become comfortable with them at the NFL level, which is a big thing. Or do they have a limited route tree because they're incapable of running certain routes? And so there's going to be limitations with that skill set. And so I would hope any scouting report worth your time would specify that piece of it. But as far as your proposition here, I guess the answer to the question is, if I was writing a scouting report, I would tell you what I mean by it. But at the end here, you ask, would I rather have a, same size? Would I rather have the guy with a slightly above average athletic profile that can run a complete route tree, or a freakish wide receiver who ran a limited route tree? It probably just depends on what I have already, right? That's what's going to matter. It's what type of wide receiver core do I have, and from there, what type of skill set do I need to add? And so if you make this specific to the Buffalo Bills, which I'm sure that's how we're all listening to this podcast, right? It's about the Bills. I would rather have the guy that is still the above average athlete that can run a full route tree. I want a guy that can come in and be ready to take targets, a guy that can come in and run the routes that I need him to from day one. And while I think the Bills could onboard a player with some rawness at receiver, I don't know. I think that sometimes there's just too steep of a curve, and playing the position in college is so different to the next level. And a lot of that is due to alignments, motions, but also there's just more on your plate. There's more sight adjustments. There's more routes that you have to run. There's more tempo involved. So I want the more polished player coming in. And I think any player that the Bills would consider at 27 would probably have that to them. L. Batman says, seems like the Mafia is obsessed with the Bills drafting a wide receiver early, taking into account the questions surrounding Gabe Davis and mentioned play, contract value, pending free agency. It's likely they will address it at some point, but if the Bills don't take a receiver in the first 3 rounds, given the extra year to develop, would you feel more comfortable spending a day 3 pick on someone with similar size speed combination like Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State, or a rawer, more athletic prospect like Andre Yosevis from Princeton? And so here's kind of the very practical application of this. And I think, obviously we're talking about day 3 for these players as opposed to pick 27. But I would still rather have Xavier Hutchinson than Andre Yosevis. Xavier Hutchinson, yeah, maybe he's not a burner, but you really just like his play style, his demeanor, the way that he runs routes, the way that he competes for leverage at the catch point, the way he catches the football. I'm really a lot more comfortable with him as a player than Andre Yosevis, who, watching him at the Senior Bowl and even getting a chance to speak to him at the Senior Bowl, I was surprised how many things he said. Well, yeah, that was really the first time I've ever done that, right? There's going to be a big curve with Josevis. And so I think Hutchinson can come in and help my offense sooner. And I think Hutchinson is a player that projects well to special teams as well. I think he'll be a very good special teamer. And so you're talking about a wide receiver 5. I think Xavier Hutchinson is exactly the type of player that you'd be looking for, where Josevis, it just might be tough for him to get on the game day active roster, just considering how big the curve there is. Nicholas says, Dawson Knox being the 7th highest paid tight end, it made me think, are tight ends the new running back? And you don't pay a tight end a second contract unless you have one putting up 1,000 yards. I want to answer this by talking about tight ends and 1,000 yards because it's not a normal thing. Tight ends don't really get 1,000 yards. It's very, very, very rare. In the last 5 years, only 6 different tight ends have logged 1,000-yard seasons. That's it. 6. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller, George Kittle, and Zach Ertz. Only 3 tight ends have had multiple 1,000-yard seasons over the last 5 years, and that's Kelce, Kittle, and Waller. And keep in mind, Kittle and Waller only did it twice. Last year in 2022, Travis Kelce was the only tight end in the NFL with 1,000 receiving yards. He had 1,300. TJ Hawkinson was number 2 at 914. Then Mark Andrews was number 3 at 847. There was nobody else in the 800s. So let's first acknowledge that 1,000-yard receiving seasons for a tight end is not normal. And so that can't be your criteria. The criteria for paying a tight end a market deal can't be whether or not they put up 1,000 yards receiving, because if that were the case, there's not a whole lot of tight ends getting money out there. I think Dawson Knox becoming the 7th highest paid tight end in the NFL has a lot more to do with the tight end market and how it has lagged behind in having a boom, right? It has taken some time for tight ends to really start creeping up there an average annual salary. And so Dawson Knox is, I mean, honestly, it's just timing for him is awesome for him to step in and get paid. But I think it's only a matter of time before we see this all the time. Other tight ends get paid and Dawson Knox gets pushed down the board. Look at Josh Allen. He's already like the 6th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. And after Burrow, Herbert, Hurts get paid this offseason, he's going to be like 9 or 10. So let's not be a victim of the moment here. Dawson Knox is not even 1 year into his extension yet. And your criteria just cannot be 1,000 yards because that's not a normal thing for a tight end to do. It has to be about what type of skill set they have and how do they impact your offense. That's what it needs to come down to. All right, folks, we got some more to get into here in just a moment, including somebody submitting a mock draft that, well, I like it a lot. So let's talk about that here after a quick break. The next one today comes from Patrick. Patrick says, I took your advice and checked in on players the Bills have interviewed. I noticed that Nolan Smith was on the list. In reviewing the TDN scouting report, it states that he's a positionless defender. How would you project him as a Mike linebacker? The other part to that question is, would he want to play that position versus being on the edge where the money seems to be much higher? Patrick, first of all, I want to start by disagreeing with the idea that Nolan Smith is a positionless defender. I don't believe that at all. He played on the edge at Georgia. Very few reps not playing on the defensive line on the edge. There's no meaningful sample size of him playing anywhere else. And so saying he's a positionless defender is something I disagree with based on him at Georgia, but also projecting him to the next level. Like, what does that mean? To me, Nolan Smith is a Hassan Reddick role type player where you rush him off the edge and you don't think twice about it. Now he's 6'2", 238, 32 and 5/8 on the arm length, ran a 4.39 40-yard dash with a 1.52 10-yard split, 41.5-inch vertical jump on a 128-inch broad jump. He's a freak, right? He's a guy that just has unbelievable explosiveness. And I understand at 6'2", 238. Well, yeah, it's kind of linebacker size, and obviously he can run. So maybe he's a linebacker / edge rusher. Maybe he's a Micah Parsons type player. But I don't know. I don't know about positionless. To me, that means you're going to play him like in the overhang and have him coverage drop. No, you want this guy playing forward and attacking. So I think he's an edge rusher that obviously you can bring him up into the A gaps and send him whatever. You can use his athleticism for some zone drops. Like, you can do a lot with him, but I think he's an edge player. And I think he's cut from the same cloth as Hassan Reddick. More dynamic. Hassan Reddick's a great athlete. Nolan Smith's another level. And what I like about Nolan Smith is that there's just no physical limitations, right? I mean, athletically, he is special. Now, there's some development here, right? Not a whole lot of production at Georgia. I think kind of just learning to use his traits is going to be important. But as a slasher type rusher, I'd like him. I'd like him for the Bills. It's a little bit like the Brian Burns conversation that we had several years ago, where maybe you look at Brian Burns and you say, man, I don't know. Like, I don't think he's really a fit for the style of defense that the Bills run. But if you remember those conversations, which you probably don't, that was a while ago, I was saying, look, if you can't find a way to get this guy going in your defense, then you got bigger questions about your coaching. And I look at Nolan Smith kind of similarly, where if you can't find a way to unleash his skill set and get after quarterbacks and has utilized that athleticism to make your scheme and your defense more dynamic, then you got some problems with your coaching staff. So Nolan Smith is a player that I'd be interested at pick 27. I don't think he fits the biggest need that the Bills have, but I think that type of skill set, that speed dynamic to go with what the Bills currently have on the D-line would be a nice addition. The next one comes from Davide from Italy. And he says, with teams being so pass heavy and linebackers playing the pass more, the loss of Edmunds is talked about because of his ability to close quickly and cover a lot of ground. Why could you not convert a safety to a linebacker that is quicker? Not a dime package, just a more nimble linebacker that is skilled in playing the pass, but still packs a punch to take on a tight end. We talk much about corners converting to safety. Why not safety converting to linebacker? Well, this is happening. You're seeing this happen a lot more. Divine Diablo, who was a college safety, is right now penciled in to be a starting linebacker for the Raiders. Jamian Sherwood has made the switch at Auburn, safety down to linebacker. Hamza Nasr-Al-Din has done that. Was a safety at Florida State. Now he's a linebacker in the NFL. The Panthers are talking about playing Jeremy Chin closer to the action, right? Kind of a hybrid safety type player. They're going to want to play him a little bit more at linebacker, right? So I think you are seeing this. But I think there's a difference between that and playing Mike linebacker, right? That's different to me. You could take a college safety and play him in a Matt Milano role, right? You can do that. In fact, Matt Milano played safety in college. So that's definitely a thing. But when you talk about playing him at your Mike linebacker, where you have to take on, and you're not taking on tight ends, man. You're taking on guards and centers and tackles. You're taking on big old fullbacks, right? Like, you're going to have to be able to take on and play physical and be a presence in the middle of a defense and cover and run. You know, I think that's what's making linebacker not a devalued position. It shouldn't be. If you get a guy that can play downhill, cover, and play sideline to sideline, that's pretty rare. It's a pretty rare thing. Some people would tell you that Tremaine Edmunds isn't even a great take-on player or a downhill player. He's getting paid $18 million a season. So I think you're seeing this, but it's not really at your Mike linebacker. It's happening with your weak side linebackers. And so I like where your mind's at, but I just don't know if this makes sense for your Mike role. That's a tough conversion. You could be just a completely oversized safety playing on a position, and that's certainly possible. But you're seeing some of this transition happening a lot here in the most recent years. Those Georgia Tech safeties, right, from last year, they come to mind as well. Tariq Carpenter as a safety convert down to linebacker. All right, next one from Paul. Paul says, I did my first and only mock draft. The goal was to get Jack Campbell at all costs, but not overpay. Paul trades out of the first round and picked up a 2024 second rounder and still landed Campbell and asked me, what do I think about this draft? And so he used a mock draft simulator, and he has the Bills trading from 27 to 45, picking up a second round pick in 2024. So they pick Iowa linebacker Jack Campbell at 45. I love that. Marvin Mims Jr., the wide receiver from Oklahoma, at 59. Love that. 82, Henry To'o, linebacker from Alabama. I don't think this is necessary. I think this is a redundant pick here. You've already drafted Jack Campbell to start. You used the third-round pick last year on Terrell Bernard. You have Matt Milano. To me, that's the pick here that I would not love. I would like Henry To'o at 82 if you didn't pick Jack Campbell earlier. But because you did, that one I don't love. At 91, tight end Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan. I think that'd be a great upgrade opportunity for tight end too. I like it. 130, Jonathan Mingo, wide receiver, Ole Miss. I think that's a very reasonable depth receiver that has a chance to really emerge and be a size player for the Bills at the position, especially if they don't bring back Gabe Davis. 137, Olusegun Oluwatimi, center from Michigan. I think that's a worthwhile depth player that may have starter appeal in time. Stetson Bennett, the quarterback from Georgia, at 196. That one, no thanks. Stetson Bennett is just zero interest at all in him in the NFL, especially for the Bills. And then I like this pick at 205, Byron Young, defensive tackle from Alabama. I think he can be a baseline one tech in the NFL, provide some good depth there as a space eater and, depth behind Daquan Jones. So overall, I like this draft. I wish he didn't double dip with the linebackers on day 2. And Stetson Bennett is never a name that it's going to excite me at all. But I think this is really good. I'd probably take it. Like if you said I could have this right now or whatever the Bills do, I might take this. So that was a fun one. All right, last one here comes from Aiden. Aiden says, I know that we seem set at running back, but if somehow, some way, Bijan Robinson is there at 27, do we take him? I can't help but think that if he's there, you take him, as Bijan is a top 5 prospect regardless of position in this year's draft. Also, if we do draft Bijan, how does that affect Nyheim Hines? Could he possibly be cut in that scenario as he wouldn't really be needed anymore? Let's address the Nyheim Hines side of this. I really don't think he would be cut. I still think the Bills look at Nyheim Hines as their starting punt returner. And I think he would probably still be part of the mix. I would question the signing of Damian Harris, although that's not a huge deal. It was 1 year, $1.7 million. But here's the deal. Like, Bijan Robinson is a special running back. I think he's a top 3 player in the class, regardless of position. He's really good. I don't think he touches 27. So, like, it's fun to think about this, and I'm cool with that. And I'd have a hard time really building a strong argument for not picking him at 27 just because of the type of player I think he is. But in the last 5 years, Najee Harris went pick 24, Travis Etienne went pick 25, and Josh Jacobs went 24. I just don't see a world where Bijan is available later than Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, or Josh Jacobs. Bijan Robinson is a significantly better prospect than all 3 of those guys. And all 3 of those guys turned out to be pretty good starting running backs in the NFL. So I think that he's going to go a lot sooner, should go a lot sooner. If he's there at 27, there's no way I could be upset if the Bills picked him. I just don't know if this is likely enough for us to really have to invest a whole lot of thought into it. Although it's a fun conversation. In fact, on the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, my other daily podcast that I do, we actually spent the entire Monday podcast going through every single pick in the first round, all of them, and said, would Bijan Robinson make sense here for this team? And so you should go back and listen to that because it will provide a lot of insight about Bijan, the different fits across the league, and what teams along the way should be considering him as their first round pick. So there you have it. Herd mentality in the books. My plan for tomorrow and the next day is to look at this offensive tackle situation. I want to look at Spencer Brown, just like I looked at Terrell Bernard and Bale Inspector and Tyrell Dodson. So I want to examine what the tape tells me about him, kind of talk about his roadmap, and set the tone. And then the next day, I want to kind of do an offensive tackle primer for the draft like we did for the linebackers and talk about, all right, which guys make sense here for the Bills and when. And so that's coming up for you over the next couple of days. So don't miss it. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.